My name is Greg, and I see sound. And what I'm going to talk about today is how I use my ability to see sound in producing recorded music. The form of audiovisual synesthesia that I have is timbre to shape, so it means all different instruments, all different types of sound produce a different shape in front of me. In thinking about things, preparing for this presentation, I realized one thing that really underpins how I create music is the emotional side of seeing sounds. When sounds are right, it feels great, and when sounds are wrong, it feels incredibly not great. Ticking clocks, for me, are absolute torture. It's like having a little strobing light wherever in the room that clock is, flashing at me, flashing at me, flashing at me. Being a musician who sleep on a lot of couches, I've become quite an expert on diffusing things. I've also realized, though, that annoyance also is what helps me in my work as a musician. And I've discussed this with some other musicians who see sounds, who spend a lot of time, like me, working on a computer, creating our recordings. And we're not seeking perfection. It's not that we're on some sort of quest to find perfection. What we're seeking to do is to make recordings that are absent of all possible annoyances. And it's widely written about how graphene color synesthetes, if they see a letter that's not their proper color, they experience that annoyance. And when it's their proper color, they experience a sense of pleasure to it. So let me give an example of when a sound is wrong for me. This is a recording my band did in London maybe 15 years ago. And with it, it all flows properly for me. We spent a lot of time working on it in the studio. And then there's some squeaks that just don't belong there. They're like bright slashes coming through a beautiful canvas. So let me play that. That still annoys me every time I hear it. The only reason it's in there was that was a collaboration with another producer. I shot him down on 19 things, so I had to give him one thing, and he was like, oh, that sounds great. Spirit of collaboration, I can't shoot someone down on everything. I wasn't thinking that 15 years later, it'll still annoy me. It's not something I have control over. It's just a completely instinctual side of me. And so I found that this annoyance, it's really an emotional scale of annoyance to pleasure. And again, it's well documented with graphene color synesthetes that whether it's not just about an A being red, it's about the A being the particular hue of red that's right for it. A blue A super annoys them, a red A is better, and then their particular hue feels great. This has also been described to me by people who experience perfect pitch. And people experience it in different ways, but for some people, what is if a note is too flat, they feel an annoyance, and they turn the tuning peg, and it gets less annoying, less annoying, less annoying, starts to please a bit, and then pleasure. And then if they go too far and the note becomes sharp, then it's starting to move into annoyance again. So they turn the tuning peg back to pleasure. And for me, working with a computer, on audio recordings, that's what a lot of my time is spent doing, is eliminating the annoyance and moving it towards each and every note, each and every instrument, producing that feeling of pleasure. Computer software is absolutely brilliant for doing this. You can completely get into every single note of the recording. And one of the best things about it is audio editing software. It gives you stick figures that in some ways resemble what I see in my synesthetic sight. This is some waveforms of sax note, a couple sax notes. It doesn't look like what a sax note looks to me. Sax notes to me, they're much more tubular with a bit of fur around them. But this gives me a good stick figure. And so when I'm working on a recording session, there's layers and layers of audio. I'll have dozens and dozens of waveform stick figures in front of me that enable me to look at those stick figures and quickly edit things without having to always play it to see it in my synesthetic vision. So, and when you edit the waveforms, it also affects how the stick figures look. So let's first hear the raw, unedited saxophone notes here. The sound seems to be offset. Legal? Audio no function. What's that? You've got an audio issue. No entiendo.
I never wear a watch. I go to the conference room constantly look at my phone. I forget I have a watch on. I go texting you. What time is it?
Let's see if we can get it again. If not, I'll just have to sing these things. Okay, so there seems to be some sort of issue. It could be a Mac PC thing. Yeah, with the unedited saxophone, what you'd be hearing there, you'd hear a few clacks of the player's keys, and then you'd hear a big long sax note. If I want to make the note shorter, I can truncate that note down, and I can also cut off those key clacks that annoy me at the beginning of the saxophone. And you see it represented there in the waveform where it says truncated. There's an expression in music production and performance called a tap. That's how a note starts. And a sax player can start quite strong, or they can start softly. If that sax player started their note stronger than what feels right for me, using the computer software, I can simply have that note fade on it instead. And as you see on the slide there where it says soft attack, you're seeing it comes on much softer. What I see in my synesthetic vision, it's also got a softer start to it when I hear that. There's certain effects that I find extremely pleasing to my synesthesia. One of them is reverb, which is an echo-like effect. For me, it produces a dark cloud around the notes, a dark warm cloud. One of my problems with this conference has been, there's been a lot of reverb on these microphones. It's producing such a dark cloud around what the speakers are saying. I've been having to really look through that dark cloud to find the words of what the person is saying. Another effect that I find increases my pleasure when I'm working on recordings is an effect called tremolo, which is a pulsing on-off effect of sound. And it produces a pleasant strobing sensation to what I see. So I'm a big fan of using tremolo in the recordings that I've made. One of the drawbacks, though, with all the amazing things that you can do with audio editing on a computer, is there's so many possibilities there. You have complete control over adjusting that sound. I refer to it as photoshopping the sounds, because that's what I'm really doing, is photoshopping the images I'm seeing to make something that's almost hyper-real beyond just what an ensemble could perform in a room. Sometimes I'll try an effect called phasing, where things come in and out almost like a wave effect. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, and then I'll back up to where I was before. Again, similar to that perfect pitch thing, where you're going from annoyance to sometimes a bit beyond, and then going back to what gives you the pleasure. So let's get to the next slide here. Next thing I want to talk about is for amongst musicians. There's a phrase that's a bit of a joke phrase of what we call a jazz trance, where the artist is in the throes of creation, and reality just fades off, and they're out there in this immersed world creating things. You see this depicted in movies with painters where night is turned into day as the artist with the mad staring eyes is splashing the paint out of the canvas and throwing knives at it. And I don't believe it's been researched as to whether or not synesthetes experience this more than non-synesthetes. I would hypothesize, though, that if we have an extra layer to our lives, or many extra layers and many extra dimensions in which we pass through this world than the physical one around us, we're probably more likely to be off in those sorts of jazz trances when we're creative than non-synesthetes. For me, if I'm truly working on a production, my mind, the music, the sonic visions, and the machine just meld together as one. And hours will pass, I won't notice time, I'll have no sensation of hunger or thirst. It's just a complete meld until I hit a point of exhaustion. And then often I'll come back to it and continue work on it the next day. And when I'm in that sort of state, working with the computer and all the things it can do, this is where I feel one of the often overlooked aspects of synesthesia that to me is the greatest aspect, is the cross-connected brains that we have. And many of what things we would look at in this conference are all about the sensory side of synesthesia. You can say, oh, everyone's a bit of a synesthete in terms of the sensory side. But this cross-connected brain is something very unique to what we have, to what non-synesthetes don't. And that cross-connected brain, there's many great synesthetic musicians like Lady Gaga who talks about when she's working on creating a new piece of music, she's also thinking about the stage lighting of it. She's thinking about the music video for it. All the aspects of it are there at once as she's creative. For me, I tend to divide when I'm applying that cross-connected brain. Part of it I'll apply to the creation of music. Another part of it I'll apply to the business aspects of putting that music out there into the world. If I'm hired to work on something like the soundtrack for an ad, then I'm thinking of all the commercial aspects and the sonic aspects all at one time as one thing. And I think that's really one of the greatest powers of synesthesia in music creation or other forms of art, is that ability to think of so many aspects of things simultaneously as one. And that's what I wanted to say to you today, so gracias. Do I do questions here, or I stand in front?
We do not have much time for questions, but probably one brief question would be okay to keep the auditorium a little bit active. So, any questions? Yeah, Sergio.
In a certain way, what you described could be described with two different words. The very good word would be coherence. Coherence, aesthetic coherence among the whole transmedia factory that pop music has become, right? And the second word could be redundance, a little bit like I described it yesterday. How do you work when you work? Do you think about finding more colorful solutions for your works based on your synesthesia?
As I say, usually for me, I would think what's going to set up my synesthesia the most. As a musician, what I'm really doing when I'm creating a recording, I'm programming a fireworks show that's going to be drugs for my own brain to give me the maximum of synesthetic pleasure. And it's really like keyframing animation, where you're programming each little bit of it, and then you play it, and it's that. So yes, that's the aspect. And as I get there and I look at all the playbacks of it, it's going through and fine-tuning out the annoyances to make it the maximum pleasure without any annoyance.
It is a criteria for you that it must be a rich, colorful landscape.
Well, yeah. And that fits in with the presentation the other day that Sean Day and York were doing over Zoom, where Deb Hayden was talking about how he works with the same 4 chords again and again, because they're his favorite colors that produce what he wants to see. Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.